Well, good morning. Man, I hope you're so well today. And today we do come in for a landing of this 7-part series. It's called Finding Hope in Family Conflict. Those of you worshiping with us at our other campuses, I'm just so pleased that we get to spend this time together today as we wrap up this series. And would you like to know what's next? Yeah, your response is overwhelming. Here we go. Next weekend we begin a series, and it's called Faith That Works. Those of you that are familiar with the New Testament of the Bible, these will be studies from the letter written by James, wisdom literature from James, and it starts next week. Will carry us through much of the summer, rest of May, and then a month of June, a month of July. So we're going to be focusing in on James. Next weekend, Brad Holmes, who directs our union ministry for our young adults, Brad launches that series for us next weekend. Fall series. Why would we be talking about the fall series? Okay, fall series, Doubter's Guide to Jesus. It will not come till September, but we hope it will be kind of a hallmark series for us, and we're working really hard on it right now. I fly to Israel this evening to do the filming work for it over the next week and a half. We will attempt to stay out of the news. And if you follow Instagram type thing, I'll be posting every day or two the videos and just pictures of where we are, what we're doing, hopefully to begin to think about and even get energized for the fall series that's coming in September, working hard on that now. And today we have this final conversation, final installment of this Finding Hope in Family Conflict, because we know that family can be the greatest source of love, affirmation, and acceptance. And family can be the greatest source for rejection, deep disappointment, and hurt. How do you find hope when you're experiencing the more complicated side of family? I was with a guy last week. It was a Wednesday night, was at a friend's house. Several of us were gathered there. A guy's name was Jim. Let me tell you a little bit about Jim's family background. 5 years old, his alcoholic father leaves the mom and 5 kids. And he's the youngest as a 5-year-old. Alcoholic dad bails. His mom immediately begins to work a couple jobs in order to hold things together. She remarries. The guy she married was devoted to her, loved her, totally indifferent to the kids. The kids were kind of in the way. The guy was big on rules and discipline, not big on affection. When he's like 8 years old, his mom gets cancer, dies of cancer when he's 9. Kids go to the funeral, stepdad doesn't go to the funeral. They get home from funeral. The stepdad has sold all of the furniture, packed their clothes into boxes, and says, I can't deal with this, I'm gone, leaving the 5 kids at the house. That night, Jim and his siblings, literally, they slept on the floor, no blankets, just covered up with clothes that they pulled out of boxes. Next day, thrown into the foster care system. And it was pretty awful. His biological dad re-enters the picture, but had not dealt with any of his alcohol issues. And so he lived with his dad for a year, but it was a pretty horrific year. And then later, I think when he was a mid-teenager, learned that his dad had committed suicide. Teenage years, moves back and forth between 2 older brothers, manages somehow to graduate from high school, living alone in a trailer. This is a guy I was hanging out with on Wednesday night. I just got a question for you. I mean, what do you even do with pain like that? What do you do with hurt that runs that deep? What are you supposed to do with pain? What are you supposed to do with hurt like that? And I believe it's the question we should be asking the main character of our story today. Kid's name is Joseph, and his life turns upside down, flipped upside down when he's 17 years old. I got a question, Joseph, what are you gonna do with that pain? Joseph comes from a large family. These are his brothers. You see him over here. He's son number 11 of 12, a younger brother, Benjamin. We drew kind of a dividing line there because these 12 boys came from 4 different marriages. And Joseph and his brother Benjamin are the sons of the favored wife, the loved, the adored wife. Jacob, the dad, loves their mom far more than he loves the mom of the other sons, and the other sons know that. Now, what happens when Joseph is 17 is when Joseph is 17, his dad, Jacob, buys him a coat that he doesn't buy for the other boys. It would have been long, it would have been colorful, it would have been ornate, it would have been expensive. And it's not that Joseph gets the coat, it's that his brothers don't get the coat. That stinking coat represented years of pain. That coat not only represented that Joseph was the favorite son, it represented all of the affection and favor and love that their moms didn't get. And they hate Joseph. They hate him. 10 brothers, little Benjamin, he comes along later. He's back at home. 10 brothers are off watching the family's real estate. I mean, your wealth was in your flocks and herds, and they're about 60 miles from home, grazing the flocks and herds. Dad, Jacob, says to Joseph, go out, check up on your brothers, find out how they're doing, find out how our wealth is doing, how our estate is doing in the cattle and herds. And they see him come, and they go, okay, here comes the coat. They grab him, they rip the coat off his back, they throw him into a pit, and they sell him. Literally, Joseph is sold to a traveling caravan headed down to Egypt. And so here is Canaan, where his home was, and suddenly Joseph finds himself down here, 17 years old, sold by his brothers. What do you do with pain like that? They take the coat, they kill a goat, they dip the coat in the goat's blood, and they take it back to the dad, Jacob, and they go, we found this. This isn't your son's coat, is it? And Jacob is like, oh no, he's been killed by a wild animal. And Jacob is inconsolable. He's just a wreck because his favored son, the son of his favored wife, is no more, is gone, presumed dead. And down in Egypt, things are bad. Then they go worse when he's accused of doing something he didn't do, and he's thrown in prison for years. When we open this story today, he's in his mid-30s. It's been almost 20 years since his brothers sold him. And as we check in on his life, we're just gonna ask a question. We're just gonna ask, Joseph, what are you doing with that hurt? Because it matters. Last 2 weeks, we followed this course of his brothers: hurt, hate, hurt. First, they're hurt by their dad because of the affection he doesn't give their moms, the affection he doesn't give them. Then they hate Joseph, the one who gets the affection, and then they hurt him by selling him to a passing caravan, selling him into slavery. So first is the hurt that they receive, and when it morphs into hate, then there's the hurt that they inflict. My friends, when you get hurt, you don't have to work for that to happen. It can feel like gravitational flow to go from hurt to hate, and suddenly you receive hurt, and then you find yourself inflicting hurt. Because first there is hurt that happens to you, then there's hurt that happens in you, and then there is hurt that happens through you. Joseph, buddy, is this gonna be your script? And step one is already underway because we see Joseph is hurt. And the question is, what are you gonna do with that hurt? What are you gonna do with that hurt? And that's a huge question for Joseph. My friends, that's a huge question for us. Huge question for us. If you had a parent that bailed, or maybe just died way too soon, a grandparent that you were deeply connected to, maybe closer to that grandma or grandpa than anybody else in the world, and they passed away, what do you do with that hurt? Those of you that experience broken trust in marriage, abandonment, betrayal, or desertion in marriage, what do you do with that hurt? Because hurt can become hate and become more hurt. First, there's the hate we received, the hurt we received, then there's the hurt we inflict. What are you gonna do with that? Some of you have a child that's working overtime to make your lives very, very interesting. What are you gonna do with that hurt? You went out for years believing that there was like an engagement ring, a wedding, a marriage on somewhere in this relationship. And finally, it was, is this going somewhere or not? And the answer was not. I'm just not ready for commitment. And you break up, and 3 months later, he's engaged to somebody else. Was I not worth committing to? What do you do with that hurt? Because first there's the hurt that happens to you, and when it morphs into hate, then there's the hurt that we begin to inflict. And we're gonna drop in on the Joseph story. He's now I think he's in his mid-30s. And we're gonna watch Joseph, and I think we're gonna ask some very critical questions about the decision points that we make when somebody hurts us, whether it's in a family situation or whether it's in another relationship in life not connected to family. We're gonna see Joseph make 3 decisions that I think are critical decisions when you find yourself hurt. 3 decisions. Decision number 1 was Joseph's decision to heal. Joseph's decision to heal. He decides to heal. And even as we're looking at that, you can go, dude, how do you decide to heal? I mean, can a person will themselves to heal? Hi, I will heal today. I think you can will yourself not to. I think you can hang on to some damage that has been done so tenaciously and identify yourself with it so closely and define yourself with it so closely that you refuse to let it go. I don't know that you can will yourself to heal. I see people will themselves not to. Now, Joseph looks something like this. Now, I don't know if he looks just like that, but dude looks Egyptian. He's no longer a slave. He's been put in charge of grain collection and grain distribution for the Egyptians. It's like there's this 7 wonderful, incredible bumper crop agricultural years where he's collecting as much grain as he can for the country. And then those are gonna be followed by 7 famished drought years. And unless he collects grain judiciously and then distributes it carefully, Egypt is going to be wrecked. And so Joseph is now put in charge of grain collection and grain distribution. And he looks Egyptian. He speaks Egyptian. Probably Egyptian clothes, Egyptian haircut, Egyptian makeup, Egyptian language, and he's got an Egyptian wife. And his Egyptian wife has a baby, and it's his son, Joseph. Joseph is now in his mid-30s, and Joseph has a kid. I want you to see what he names his first son. Kid's name is Manasseh. Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh and says, "It is because God has made me forget all the trouble in all my father's household." Somehow the name Manasseh had a word play on it, which is, God has made me forget all the pain that happened back home with my brothers. What's happening to Joseph here is that he's beginning to heal. Listen, what's happening to Joseph here is he's beginning to heal. Listen, the pain is draining away. He's now holding this little baby and he's holding his son and he says, God is causing me to forget all the damage my brothers did to me. Joseph is healing. Son number 1, Manasseh. Son number 2, Ephraim. The second he named Ephraim and he said, it is because God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering. God has made me prosper right here where I experienced such phenomenal and incredible pain. God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering. If I could boil down our time today into one prayer, into one wish, into one blessing, it would be this: may God make you fruitful in the land of your suffering. May our gracious God make you prosper in the very spot that brought so much pain. You see, but Joseph is willing to heal. I don't know that you can will yourself to heal, but you can certainly will yourself not to. Remember that the next time you listen to someone and their jaw clenches and they go, that company ruined my life. You go, dude, that was 17 years ago. I don't think they had the power to do that to you. I mean, maybe there's something unfair or unjust, but still the rage, we can hang on to something and refuse to let it go. We can will ourselves not to heal. Now, I need to mention this very, 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 very delicately, and I just hope that you'll hear this out of a good spirit. It is possible to be wounded by someone so terribly that we begin to define ourselves by that wound, and I do not think this is a good idea. Where we identify and define ourselves so much with that abuse or that wound, we hang on to it because we've made it our identity. And I would just ask, Well, for how long? For how long? Is it possible that there could come a day when you could be more defined by your healing and more defined by an emerging beauty, an emerging internal beauty than by a wound that you suffered? I think sometimes we so closely identify with a wound that we don't know that we can live without it, and we will ourselves not to heal. I'm not sure who I am without that. What if there is a day where our gracious God would want to bring healing and we're unwilling to let go? Now, for those of you who are connected to the story of the cross, this is so critical and it is so important because the story of the cross is that he, Jesus, loved us and gave himself for us. Listen, he loves you and gave himself for you. What I'm suggesting is a more powerful identity might be found here. Is it possible someday to say, as terrible as something that happened was, I am now more defined by what someone did for me than by what someone did to me? Is it possible to come to a day where you are more, your identity, your core identity and definition comes far more from the fact that someone loved you and gave himself for you than the fact that someone took something from you? This is a big deal. This is a big deal. I think there are decisions that are made. We don't always decide the space that we're in, but we can decide what to do in that space over time. Joseph, there's a decision to heal. Manasseh, God is causing me to forget all the pain from my home. Ephraim, God has caused me to be fruitful in the very place that I suffered. May God cause you to be fruitful and prosper. May he show his favor in the very place of your suffering. The bad years start. 7 years of bumper crop, agricultural abundance. The people have never seen anything like it. Year after year after year after year. And then the rains stop. And it's 7 years of awful. We open the story when they are just 2 years into these 7 awful years. There's 5 more terrible years to come. Joseph is now 39 years old. It has been 22 years since his brothers dumped him, tossed him into a pit, ripped off his coat, and sold him as a slave. 22 years, 2 decades have passed. And the camera, it's interesting the way the story, Genesis chapter 41, the camera is focused on Joseph in Egypt. Genesis chapter 42 it shifts, and suddenly we move up north to Canaan, and the focus is on Jacob, his dad, and the brothers. And so Genesis 42 begins with this line. It says, now, when Jacob, that's his dad, when he learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, why do you just keep looking at each other? He continued, I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us so that we may live and not die. This isn't a mild grocery shortage. This is devastating. There are people who might starve to death during this famine. He says, you guys get going. You get down to Egypt. You buy some grain down there so that our family, and these guys are all dads now. They have kids. Some of them are grandpas. They're like in their 40s, so that we may live and not die. Well, it's time for the brothers to take off. Verse 3, then 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain from Egypt. 10 of Joseph's brothers. Let me see, there were how many total? 12? Joseph's down in Egypt, leaving. Time for you mathletes to excel here. Leaving 11, 10 of Joseph's brothers are sent down to Egypt. I wonder who stays home. Anyone want to place a bet on what brother is not allowed to take the trip down to Egypt? Guesses, anyone? Let me see. What brother might not be allowed to make the trip? Verse 4. But Jacob did not send Benjamin, Joseph's brother, with the others because he was afraid that harm might come to him. Does daddy have a new favorite? Little overprotection, maybe? Listen, Benjamin isn't a seventh grader. He's probably in his early 30s. He has kids. Benjamin's married. It's kind of like, yeah, no, we're not sending Benjamin. Something bad might happen to Benjamin. Does daddy have any favorite? Someone a little overprotected in their life? No. We can't lose the second son of Rachel. He's all I have left. And so 10 brothers head south, and they seek out this guy who's in charge of grain distribution, Egyptian clothing, Egyptian haircut, Egyptian makeup, Egyptian language, Egyptian name, the guy Zaphath-Paneah. And 10 brothers show up one day, and he recognizes them, and they don't recognize him. And he starts talking through a translator. Interesting story. As soon as Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he pretended to be a stranger and spoke harshly to them. It's not very Jesus-y. Where did you come from? Where did you come from? He asked. From the land of Canaan, they replied, to buy food. Although Joseph recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. Anyone see some interesting dynamics building here? And he says, you're not brothers, you're spies. You're spies, you're 10 spies. You're not even related. You came down here to case this place, find out where our borders are unprotected so that you can organize some kind of attack at our weak spots. You're not brothers, you're spies. No, we're spies. There are 12 brothers. One of them's back home, and one of them went away a while ago. He says, prove it. I'm gonna keep one of your brothers as collateral, you. And they grab Simeon, and they tie Simeon in front of these other brothers and say, you guys go back home. You get the younger brother, and you bring him here to prove that you're 12 brothers. And then you'll get your brother back. You will not see me, and you will not get any more grain until you come back with this younger brother you claim to have. And he gives them grain, they load up their donkeys, and they head for home. What's going on here? What's up with this? What's he doing? Okay, decision number one was a decision to heal. Decision number two was a decision to wait. It's gonna take these guys months to get home, run out of grain, and then get back. And he is so willing to sit this one out. He is so not in a hurry. It's like, Joseph, I've waited 22 years, man. A few more months for this to unfold, it's fine with me. Joseph decides to wait. Now, I wanna show you two narratives that didn't happen. When Joseph recognized his brothers, he didn't start screaming in Hebrew, I am Joseph, and you sold me, and you're gonna pay. That doesn't happen. Something else doesn't happen. He doesn't go, I'm Joseph, and you sold me. I forgive you, I forgive you. That doesn't happen either. He just waits. So I can sit on this one for a little while longer. He waits. Why does he wait? He waits because there's something he wants to know. There's information that he doesn't have. There's something he desperately wants to know. There's a question in the back of his mind that he wants answered. And in the meantime, he decides to wait. This is important for some of you. It's important because when you are hurt and you are frustrated, hurt and frustration can often blur good judgment. You with me on this? Frustrated hurt can blur good judgment. And sometimes we say something or vow something, and it's something we should have sat on for a little while. We are never going to your parents' home for a holiday, for a vacation again. We are never going to spend another holiday at their house. Well, never is kind of a long time. I mean, did I just make a decision out of hurt and frustration about where to spend Christmas in 2025? Based upon something I'm feeling right now? Listen, Christmas, Thanksgiving, what, we're talking 6, 7 months out? There's a couple months to think about this. Sometimes you need just to slow down, dial it back, power down, and make a better decision that we could sit on that for a little while longer. Remember this, when a child just absolutely outrages you and you go, you are on restriction for 2 months. You will not leave your bedroom for 2 months. Might want to wait. Just decide in a couple hours what to do. Well, why? Well, number one, it's that frustrated hurt can blur our judgment. And number two, he's 4, right? Sit on that one for a couple hours. Power down a little bit. So this is very important if you think it's time to kick a child out of the house and they do something and you just want to take all of their clothes and just toss it out onto the front porch. Dial back, let's sit on that one for 2 or 3 days. Seek wise counsel. It's possible that 3 days later, in a calmer moment, without all of the energy, without all of the frustration, and without all the rage, you just go, listen, it's time. It's time. You're done with high school, done with college, you're 47, it's time. I guess what I'm saying here is that often there's this wounded, frustrated hurt that boils over into a consequential, spontaneous vow or decision. And we're just not thinking clearly. And if we step back from it, maybe we will think more clearly. She decides one day, I'm done, and calls an attorney. He finds out, he calls an attorney. And suddenly it becomes this race when people get scared about where the money's gonna go and who's gonna get custody over the kids, a race to prove that the other person is the most despicable person who has ever sucked air on this planet. My friends, I have seen marriages that were reconcilable, so not out for the count. I've seen divorces that didn't need to happen, with litigation that was unnecessary, with child custody dispute that was a bloodbath, and years of wounded hurt that simply didn't need to be there. Because someone jumped and then someone else jumped, and it accelerates really fast. Do not underestimate the destruction that can be done by 2 individuals in a frantic race to not get hurt. You know who said that? I did just a moment ago. Do not underestimate the damage that can be done by 2 individuals in a frantic race not to get hurt. Joseph looks out and he sees his brothers. And it's gonna take 3 chapters of your Bible to unfold. Genesis chapter 42, Genesis chapter 43, Genesis chapter 44, because there's information he doesn't have. And there's a question in the back of his mind. He doesn't have all the data. Joseph chooses to wait, and it keeps the situation from escalating. So he chooses to wait. Now the brothers, they got an interesting situation when they get back home, because Simeon is collateral. Simeon's tied up. He's in prison in Egypt. And so now 9 brothers are heading back home. Dad comes out, hi, where's Simeon? Well, we got a situation, Dad. Back in Egypt, the master of the land said that unless we bring our younger brother, Benjamin, he won't see us again, won't release Simeon, and won't give us any more grain. And then they open up their grain bags, which his family is gonna survive, and they paid dearly for this grain, and every brother finds the silver that they took down to Egypt to pay the guy back in their bags of grain. It's like, oh, what happened here? It's like, we didn't pay. All of our money has been returned, and they are flipping out. And you want to think the boys are flipping out. Look at what Jacob does here. Just hear the pain in his voice. It says, their father Jacob said to them, you have deprived me of my children. Joseph is no more, and Simeon is no more. And now you want to take Benjamin? Everything is against me. Read those last 4 words with me. Ready? Everything is against me. No, not good enough. Now whine them. Ready? Everything is against me. How many of you that was last week? Everything is against me. It's not true, but it sure feels like it. I just want to go, Jacob, dear Jacob, you don't realize that there is a redemption story that's unfolding here, and God is powerfully at work in and around and through this story. He goes, everything is against me. You go, yeah, it's not true, but some days it feels true. All of the tumblers of the universe are working against me. Everything is against me. He says, Benjamin's not going. You are not taking him down to Egypt. And the grain supply gets lower and lower and lower and lower. Finally, Dad says, hey, go down to Egypt and buy more grain. They say, we are not, that guy told us, you will not see me unless you bring your younger brother, and he'll know if we try to bring somebody else. Why did you tell him you had a younger brother? He asked us, is your dad still living, and are there any more kids? How did we know he was gonna accuse us of being spies? And finally, Jacob goes, all right, just take Benjamin, go on down, but wait. Take some presents, take some almonds, take some pistachios, take some honey, take some herbs. Jacob is acting like Jacob. Let's just grease the wheels here. Appease this guy when you get up. So they take all of these gifts down to Egypt and they lay them out for their meeting with Joseph. Simeon is brought up, untied in front of them, given back to them. And then Joseph shows up to see his brothers. I want you to see a piece of the conversation here. He asked them how they were. And then he said, how's your aged father you told me about? Is he still alive? Trying to keep his composure, he just says, yeah, how about the old guy? Is he still living? And then he looks at the 11 and he sees him. He sees his little brother that he has not seen in 22 years. As he looked about, he saw his brother Benjamin, his own mother's son. And he asked, hey, is this your youngest brother, the one you told me about? And he said, God be gracious to you, my son. You go, how did he hold it together? He doesn't. He loses it. Deeply moved at the sight of his brother, Joseph hurried out of the room, looked for a place to weep. He went to his private room and he wept there. He just has a meltdown. And seeing his mom's son and seeing the brother he has not seen in 22 years. He invites the 11 to his house for dinner and has his steward place them around the table in birth order. Some of these guys, because they were born from different moms, some of these guys are months apart and they're in their 40s. So they all look about the same age. So the ability to go number one, number two, number three, number four, they're looking around going, whoa. And then Benjamin, he gives Benjamin like 5 times as much food as the other brothers get. He supersizes Benjamin's Egyptian meal. And I don't think he's watching Benjamin eat. I suspect that he's watching them watch Benjamin eat. Is he going like, did you see that? Did you see that? Not only is he dad's favorite, he's this guy's favorite too. Can you believe this? I think he's watching them watch him, and the next morning they get up, donkeys loaded with grain, they breathe a sigh of relief, and they head for home. No, that's a terrible ending to the story. It would be. They get to the outskirts of town, breathing a huge sigh of relief, and turn around and a small Egyptian army is coming after them, headed by Joseph's steward, who catches up with them and goes, how dare you? How dare you? How dare you come into my master's home and enjoy my master's hospitality and eat at my master's table and then steal his silver cup while leaving? They went, what? You're accusing us of being thieves? I mean, inspect the bags if you want to. And if you find that silver cup on any of us, that person you can put to death. Bad thing to promise. Anyone want to place a bet on whose bag of grain the silver cup happens to be in? Reuben's cup, Levi, Simeon, Judah, Dan, Asher, Naphtali, Issachar, Zebulun, all the way down. And Benjamin lowers his cup, his bag, and there there is the cup in Benjamin's. You think someone was set up here? Maybe. And they all head back to Joseph, and they're in trouble, and they know they're in trouble. And they get back, and Joseph said, listen, everybody here can leave and go back home in peace, but him, the guy that ripped me off. No, you're not gonna be my slaves, just the one who stole the cup. Joseph said, far be it from me to do such a thing, like to make you my slaves. Only the man who was found to have the cup will become my slave. The rest of you just go back to your father in peace. Just leave the kid. Now this is the moment. This is the moment where Joseph is revealing the question that has been on his mind for months. And the question is this: would you do it again? Would you break my dad's heart again? Would you return home again and tell him that the other son of Rachel is gone? Would you wreck my dad again? This is what Jacob has wanted to know all along. Have you changed? Did anything change? In 22 years ago, you ripped my coat from my back, tossed me into a pit, and sold me, and then went and concocted some story to our dad. Would you do it again? Would you break my dad's heart again? I just want you to know that there's an opportunity here for 10 brothers to go, take him. Our dad never loved our moms like he loved his mom. And our dad never loved us like he loved and protected his brother and him. Take him, good riddance. And Judah was the brother that had told the others, let's sell him into slavery. Judah steps forward. And he goes, listen, we're 12 brothers, but there's only 2 of them from that mom. And my dad's heart is so interwoven with the heart of this kid because his brother disappeared years ago that if anything happens to this kid, it will kill my dad. So instead of leaving him, please take me. Please, can I stay and be your servant just to return the kids home? Because this will be the end of my father if this kid doesn't come home. Judah offers to take Benjamin's place. And in this moment, Joseph realizes that there has been a significant change that has taken place in 22 years, but Judah also knows that there's a significant change that's taken place in 22 years. It's decision time for Joseph. Right now, he's got to decide what to do. First, he decides to heal. Second, he decides to wait. Now waiting is over. Decision number 3, he decides to be a healer. Instead of compounding the damage, he decides to act as a healer to the family. Starts to cry, barks out orders in Egyptian and sends all the servants out of the room, so it's just him and these 11 guys. And then the craziest thing happens. Zaphath-Paneah, in charge of grain distribution, starts to speak Hebrew in their dialect. And this is what he says. Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still living? I'm Joseph. His dad's still alive. But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified at his brother. They are scared to death. And then Joseph goes, come here. Just kind of huddle in. And Joseph said to his brothers, come close to me. And when he had done so, he says, I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. I am Joseph, the one you sold. And then he says, and now do not be distressed. Do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. Do you realize the power here? You sold me, but God sent me. He said, look, we're just 2 nasty years. We got 5 more years of famine to come. If I weren't in my position right now, if I didn't have the authority that I have right now in Egypt, it's possible that our family would be decimated. You sold me. God sent me. You sold me. God sent me. It was awful. It was terrible. It was horrible. Something was being crushed, but something was being rescued. You sold me, but God sent me. Say those words with me. You sold me. God sent me. Ready? You sold me. God sent me. One more time. You sold me. God sent me. In Genesis chapter 50, the last chapter of the book of Genesis, Joseph would word it like this: you meant it for evil, God meant it for good. You meant wickedness, God meant goodness. See, Joseph, dude, I got a question. Why in the world would you follow a God that lets you experience such pain? Why would you follow and why would you trust a God that let you be tossed into a pit and then sold to a caravan? And I think that Joseph would say back to us, because often God is at work in and around and through the hurt to redeem and to restore. It was awful, it was terrible, but God was at work in and around and through that pain, through that hurt, to heal, to redeem, and to restore. Joseph sends his brothers north with carts. They got a bunch of kids. There are some grandkids in the picture. Jacob, he's not ready to walk this distance. He is an old guy. Carts to bring them on down, and the family migrates from Canaan to Egypt because there's 5 more years of famine. You go, oh, so at the end of 5 years, then they all went back home. No. Joseph and his brothers will die in Egypt. The whole family dies. No, they multiplied like rabbits and became a rather large people group. And generation passes one after the other. And one day there is a Pharaoh in Egypt that had no regard for Joseph and no memory of Joseph's faithfulness. And they enslaved the Jacob family. Till a shepherd by the name of Moses approaches Pharaoh and says, thus says the God of Jacob, thus says the God of Israel, let my people go. The Joseph story ends the book of Genesis, first book of your Bible. Second book of your Bible is Exodus, the exit from Egypt. And if you put these two together, you realize that Moses brought them out because Joseph brought them down. Each of the sons becomes a clan or a tribe. And so once the children of, now Jacob has another name. Some remember a couple messages back that he had his name changed from Jacob to something else. Jacob to what? Jacob to Israel. These 12 sons are the sons of Israel, or the children of Israel, the children of Jacob. And so when they finally make it back to the land of promise, the division looks something like that. There's Simeon, there's Judah, there's Dan, there's Benjamin. Manasseh, part of it here, part of it here. That's one of Joseph's kids. There's Reuben, the oldest. There's Ephraim, named after the other one of Joseph's kids. What if God is telling a good story? It's just a good story with some awful parts. What I love about the Joseph story is that Joseph begins to operate on a different script than his brothers are operating off of. The script that they were operating off of was hurt, then what? Then hate, and then what? Then hurt. First there's the hurt that you experience, then there's the hurt that you inflict. There are some decisions made in this troubled space, and Joseph begins to work off a script that looks like this: hurt, healing, healer. Rather than hurt, hate, hurt, it's hurt. And he starts to heal. And then he becomes a family healer, hurt. It starts awful. Hurt, healing, healer. I just got to ask you, what if this is the season in your life where you need to put one script down and pick up another script? And what if that hurt, hate, hurt script is what you've been using It's your kind of standard operating manual. What if this is a season where God desires to do something radically different in your life? Hurt, yes, badly. Healing, healer. So Wednesday night, I'm at a friend's house, and a few of us are there, and it was with this guy. Dad, alcoholic dad, abandons 5 kids and a wife at age 5. Mom remarries, dies of cancer. Stepdad takes off. Alcoholic dad commits suicide. He's 15 years old. He's a football standout. He has some Christian coaches in his life. They invite him to a camp run by a group called Fellowship of Christian Athletes. He has a hole in his life that is cavernous. Speaker starts talking about the love of Christ and how Jesus came to fill that hole. Age 15, things were still messed up on a grand scale, but his heart began to respond to the love of Christ. Guy's name is Jim Daly, and he is the president of an organization called Focus on the Family. Centered in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Some years ago, Jim Daly discovered that along the Front Range of the Rocky Mountains, Colorado Springs, Denver, Fort Collins, there were 900 foster kids where the parents had totally lost parental rights. These were kids just waiting adoption or bouncing from one foster care home to another until they graduated from high school and tried to find their way in the world. And Jim Daly started this initiative called Wait No More, where he started rallying churches along the Front Range of the Rocky Mountains to adopt as many of those kids as they possibly could. And they adopted 600 of the 900 kids during that season of time. What I'm suggesting to you is that did not happen in spite of Jim Daly's horrible upbringing, but because of Jim Daly's horrible upbringing. That out of those wounds was a healing that brought forth incredible passion to see families secure and to see them love well. So question for Jim, what do you do with that hurt, man? What do you do with that hurt? And what do we do with ours? This is gonna sound oversimplistic, but just understand the person in the background that's coming to. Jim suggests these 4 points. Number 1, embrace the pain, man. Don't pretend like it never happened. Don't numb out. Awful is awful, recognize it. Embrace the pain. Secondly, find Christ in it. Moving in and around and through the pain. Number 3, let him heal you. Number 4, and then use that to fuel your passion in life as a healer. Embrace the pain. Find Christ in it, let him heal you, and then use that as your passion in life. And I know we're condensing years of healing into a few sentences, but I don't know that I could sum it up any better than that. All I've been trying to say today, and all I've been trying to communicate through this entire series, is that there is hope in family crisis. And our hope is not that everything will go well. Our hope is that God can be trusted even when we don't understand what's going on. Even we don't get what's going on. And God can be trusted because he is powerfully at work to love and redeem and restore, even in the middle of the mess. My hope and my prayer and my longing is that the hurt that you've experienced would draw you toward the Christ who loves you dearly and not be something that pushes you away. I'm gonna ask you to stand here and at our campuses as well, and we're gonna sing a beautiful song together. Just ask you to open your heart in this song, and then our campus pastors or room hosts will dismiss each room. Gracious God, I give thanks that we have been in this space at this time. I pray for my brothers and sisters here that we would hear your voice, that we would respond to it. Now to him who brings hope and healing and restoration. We give thanks and pray in his name. Amen.